The Republican-led Senate has just advanced a bill that would deregulate banks and make it even more likely for another financial collapse. Now, this legislation would be, it would roll back parts of Dodd-Frank and by increasing the threshold at which banks are subject to stricter capital and planning requirements. So that's one of the protections that was put in by the Dodd-Frank reform bill. It's making it so that banks that are over $50 billion in assets were subject to certain rules, oversight rules, to make sure that they didn't make risky investments and things like that. Now, among the provisions inside this bill, according to Politico, banks would have easier mortgage regulations. That's smaller banks, and small is a relative term. It would also have new exemptions from tougher oversight for regional banks with $50 billion to $250 billion in assets, a directive to the Federal Reserve to tailor its rules for large banks, and relaxed capital and liquidity requirements for some of the nation's biggest financial institutions. Now, what does that mean? It means that some of the biggest banks in America are now free from increased oversight. That's not good. Now, some of the biggest Wall Street firms are already exempt from this, and yet the ones that are not, or the ones that will be soon exempt, if this passes, and it's very likely to pass, can still wreck the economy. Even if you have smaller banks, 4 banks that are worth $50 billion each, that is below that threshold, well now, if all of those fall, which is basically what we saw in 2008, a lot of smaller banks collapsing, that will still lead to a bigger collapse. That is the problem. Now, that's why the CBO issued a report earlier saying that this bill increases the chance of another bailout. Quote, CBO's estimate of the bill's budgetary effect is subject to considerable uncertainty, meaning they don't know exactly what's going to happen, in part because it depends on the probability in any year that a systematically important financial institution will fail. However, CBO estimates that the probability is small under current law and would be slightly greater under this new legislation. It is basically saying that if you pass this bill, it is more likely now than under current law that we will have a disastrous financial collapse that will end up leading to more bailouts for the banks. So that's not good. Now, Republicans are pushing this. This is a crapo bill. By the way, it's a crapo bill, and it's also the crapo bill because it was pushed by Republican Representative Mike Crapo. So now, and I'm sorry, that's Senator Crapo. Anyway, so the Republicans are on board, but, and you're not gonna enjoy this part, it also has bipartisan support, enough to actually clear a filibuster. 12 Democrats have decided we're actually going to support this bill. Now, who are they? You're not going to be shocked. You have Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, North Dakota. You have Jon Tester from Montana. You have Mark Warner from Virginia, Claire McCaskill from Missouri, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Tim Kaine from Virginia, Gary Peters from Michigan. You also have Michael Bennet from Colorado, Chris Coons from Delaware, Tom Carper from Delaware, and, of course, Senator Doug Jones. Aren't you glad you voted for Doug Jones? Still better than a pedophile, though. Now, those are the members of the bailout caucus that helped with this. Now, Mark Warner, of course, is one of the leaders on this bill. He told reporters, "We feel very good about getting this through this process." This bipartisan process of actually supporting and helping the banks. In fact, Jon Tester also chimed in. He said, quote, "I hope that our bipartisan work can rub off on the rest of Congress so we can break through the partisan gridlock that has plagued Washington for too long." Now, think about that, right? Whenever you hear the words bipartisan, you know that it's going to be bad. Hold on to your wallets, man. Watch out. The only time Republicans and Democrats can seem to get along is when they seem to want to help the banks. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? No, that's not weird at all. That's corruption. You know what they were going to take up? And The Intercept reported this last week. They said, Mitch McConnell said that instead of taking up a gun bill, a bill to do something about gun control, which kills 33,000 people every day, we're going to do the crapo bill instead. You know why? Because we can get bipartisan support. We can get these corporate Democrats on board so we can pass this bill that is going to help the banks. Now, there's more. Joe Donnelly also said in a statement, quote, after years of bipartisan work to advance regulatory relief for the community banks and the credit unions across Indiana, I'm pleased that the full Senate will debate the legislative packages I negotiated. This legislation will make it easier for Hoosier families to gain access to mortgages and small businesses to access capital. And it also includes important new consumer protections, such as free credit freezes in response to the Equifax data breach. Yeah, but those things, they don't go far enough. Any protection that's in this bill does not go far enough. That's what Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's a big critic of this bill, Sherrod Brown, another big critic of this bill, and Bernie Sanders are all saying. This is not enough, and you're deregulating the banks that need to be regulated more. In fact, Bernie Sanders in a statement earlier called for the breaking up of these big banks. So he ain't done with this, man. Now, and by the way, Elizabeth Warren says she's going to actually try to add some consumer protection amendments. But of course, there's no guarantee that any of this consumer protection stuff is going to pass. Well, it's very, very likely that the deregulation of this bank will pass. They've got 67 votes. That's how much it passed the committee to get onto the floor. They have opened up debate. And very, very likely, we're going to end up making it even more likely for these banks to crash the economy and get bailed out again. We've already had to bail them out once. Where's our bailout? Now, there's one more piece of information here. Now, 9 out of the 12 Democrats supporting this bill also count the financial industry as either their biggest or second biggest donor. It is the corruption. And some members will also personally profit from this. And this is according to a new report by TYT Investigates. Senator Heidi Heitkamp, again, being primaried by Dustin Pyre, look him up, and her husband have nearly $1 million invested in two of the bill's biggest winners, JP Morgan Chase and Berkshire Hathaway, according to 2016 financial disclosure documents reviewed by TYT Investigates. For the senator, whose net worth is roughly about $4.5 million in 2015, according to an estimate by the Center of Responsive Politics, the JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway investments potentially account for a substantial portion of her and her husband's assets. Not only that, but the JP Morgan PAC also gave $5,000 to Heidi Heitkamp's leadership PAC, the Dakota Prairie PAC. It's no wonder why she's supporting this bill. It is corruption. Legalized bribes make for bought senators. That's why you have a bailout caucus. We got to vote them out, man. We got to get rid of them. Vote out the corporate Democrats. Vote them all out. All the names that are on this bill. And I will post them in the links to in the description of this video. All these people got to go. And a lot of them, thankfully, have challengers. Primaries matter. If you are sick and tired of the corporate Democrats teaming up with the Republicans to make it, to help their rich friends, vote for progressives. Primaries, man, they're more important than general elections. Get out there, get registered. Voting is happening in Texas today. Get out there and vote. It's the only way to stop these assholes. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.